You gotta have a really clear goal before you jump into any of these things.
Why do you want to do this? And what benefit is it going to be to your life to actually change what you're doing with your money day to day?
At the end of the day, you gotta understand like the ins and outs of your money.
What is painful for you to look at in your spending? Because there's going to be some place on your statements where you're like, that wasn't good.
Without tracking what you're spending, like there's just so many things that are gonna fall through the cracks.
What motivation was there for me to actually pay off this debt if I didn't have like a very clear goal at the beginning to do so?
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Lauren and I are back for our weekly episode where we talk all things money, from getting out of debt, budgeting, investing, and pretty much all the other wild things going on in the world of finance. Now, Lauren, I thought today would be the perfect opportunity to talk about how people could realistically not only transform their finances, but really just their entire approach to money in something as short as 90 days. And, it's an interesting topic because I feel like most of the time when we talk about these things, like moves with your money, these things are happening over the course of like years and decades. But I feel like there's things that people can start doing right away with their finances that they're going to see like an immediate effect, not only to how they're managing it, but just like that level of confidence that they have. And, I feel like a big part of like making those big moves that will eventually pay off down the road, a big part of that is building up the confidence, and then also knowing some of the things that you should be doing that could have, a more immediate effect on your finances.
Yeah, and I feel like that confidence starts from taking the small steps. So I think this is a good episode to really walk through what you can do in the immediate future, because you're right. I think a lot of the times we talk about things that happen, retirement, savings goals that are so far into the future that doesn't even feel like realistic for some people. So yeah, the confidence that you need to get there is going to be things that you're doing, the small little things, the small steps you're taking each day. So I think this is a great episode to sort of walk people through what they can do within the next 30, 60, 90 days to really transform their finances for that longer future goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I wanted to kind of talk about like in a 90-day time frame, because I feel like that's that's a tangible thing that I think people can realistically commit themselves to. Like when you say like, hey, like, if you want to get out of debt, this is going to be like a 12 to 18 month process, or, it could be even longer than that. Like that's a big hill to climb for a lot of people. But hey, like what are some things that you can do that like in just the next 90 days, like you're going to see like an immediate effect, and more often than not, or more likely than not, you're probably going to see an effect right after you do it. But I think the first place to kind of start this, before we get into like some real tangible tips, I think it's really important to understand that like all of this stuff, like kind of like to lay the groundwork, like you got to have a really clear goal before you jump into any of these things. I feel like that has to be the starting point. And I feel like naturally for a lot of people, that will be the starting point. Whether that goal is something tangible, like I want to get out of debt or build up my savings or buy a home, or it's even more like an emotional feeling that they associate with their money that they no longer want to feel. Like I know that's a big one for a lot of people who I talk to. It's like, I just don't want to be stressed anytime I open up my bank account, or like when I have to go make a purchase, like that feeling of like not knowing, is it okay for me to make this purchase right now? I know that for a lot of people, that's a really big one. But yeah, I feel like a lot of this conversation has to start with like getting really clear on what the goal is for the future. That way, all the work you're doing, like there's actual meaning behind it,
Yeah. And if there's no goals there, then it's like, that's not going to be motivating to actually stick to any type of change that you're looking to, to implement. Right. I think the best example of this is whenever I was starting my debt-free journey, like I knew that was going to be a grind. I knew that was going to be longer than 3 months, but I had to get clear on why I wanted to do that, because think about it, 2 years down the road, like what motivation was there for me to actually pay off this debt if I didn't have like a very clear goal at the beginning to do so? So yeah, I think before all of these tips that we talk about, it's really about, why do you want to do this, and what benefit is it going to be to your life to actually change what you're doing with your money day to day?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like, for me, like the thing that started my whole like deep dive into personal finance, which eventually led to me like helping people through coaching, like the thing that started it for me was like I was earning money from creating videos like on social media for gym owners and fitness influencers, and like I just hated the feeling like when money would hit my account, like I just didn't know what I was doing with it. It was like, you know, in your head, you're like, oh yeah, like I'm not bad with money. But then you really sit down and think about it. You're like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Like, you know, like I didn't have credit card debt or like any of the bad, like typical markers that you're bad with your money, but I didn't feel good with my money. And so for me, like the big goal for me initially was like, I just want to feel better with my money. And then that transformed into a more tangible goal, which was like, hey, like I want to get out of debt. And then I want to build up an emergency fund. And like the more recently, the big goal that my wife and I have been working towards has been buying a house. And you know, that was like a 3 or 4 year journey, which has finally like been realized, you know, just like a few weeks ago when we closed on our house. But like, yeah, having those goals, like that's, to me, that's like the big part of it. Like and every time, like when I speak to someone about their finances, I'm like, why do you want to do this stuff? And they're almost like, you know, I get a little annoying with it, you know, just to be fully honest, where I'm like, I'm asking them why like 3 or 4 times in a row. And they're like, why are you asking so much? I'm like, because like, you know, you wanting to get out of debt or you wanting to improve your credit score, like you don't want to do it just to have a better credit score or like to open up your bank account and see more money in it. Like you want to do those things because what it's going to actually afford you in life, you know? And so what are those things that you want in life? And I think to me, that's like the key part of it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I'd say let's jump into these, but I'll first off by saying these are not super sexy things. We're not going to tell you anything revolutionary, but what it is going to do for you is if you actually implement these, you will see a change. But I think, Nick, a lot of people are expecting like, you know, things that are mind blowing or they've never thought of before. But really, it's the basics that I think is going to get you to where you want to be in the future if you just sit down today and actually put the work in. So why don't we start with tip 1 here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Tip number 1, understanding your cash flow. And I think this one's super underrated. You know, most people, like you said, like they think like the things that are going to transform their finances are like these big, like sexy ideas of what they have to be doing. And it's like, no, like at the end of the day, you got to understand like the ins and outs of your money. Like how much is coming in? How much is going out? What do all these expenses look like on a monthly basis? Like, what are your obligations when it comes to having to pay for things? And I don't think enough people really understand like where their money's actually going. And so usually the first place when I start working with someone is like helping them understand their cash flow, you know, like understanding, hey, what does your income actually look like? You know, like when it's coming in, like how much are you getting paid? When are you getting paid? Like what's the frequency of it? Understanding all those little intricacies of what's coming in, what's going out. If you have debt, like all of those things like that. But Lauren, I guess question for you, like where do you think people should start? You know, if they want to get a better understanding of what their cash flow is, where should they start with that?
Yeah, so I'll just give an example from my own life. Whenever I started my debt-free journey, like actually wanted to plan out when I wanted to pay off my debts and like have a plan for that, I sat down for the first time ever. Like I've actually never been like terrible with money. Like I've never had credit card debt or anything like that, but I never knew where my money was going. And I was essentially living paycheck to paycheck. So the first thing that I did was I actually sat down literally with pen and paper. Like you can't make it like harder than that. You know, I sat down with pen and paper and I had my computer there. And I pulled up like my credit card statements and my bank statements and really took note of where my money was going. So the first thing I put on that paper was like how much I made every month, like what my paycheck actually was. And then I just sort of started stacking things below it. Like, okay, I have this amount of money coming into my account every month. Now, where is every single one of those dollars going? Right. So rent, it was my car payment. It was my student loans, you know, it was groceries, it was eating out. It was all these different things. And then I really had a good idea of like, okay, I have this money coming in. Now this is exactly where all of my money's going and where it should be going. And then you get to see where your money's going that maybe you don't want it to be going. So I think the biggest thing is just sitting down and looking at every single transaction. It's a little humbling. It's a little scary because, you know, checking these things can be scary for people, but this is really the first place you need to go. Whether you want to do that on a pen and paper or on like a Google Sheet or whatever, I think the biggest thing is just to take inventory of your current spending habits and of your current expenses. So that's really where I would start. Just super basic, but understanding that high level of like where your money is actually going.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, to be fair, I think some people will think like, oh, well, looking back through the last few months, like I don't want to do that. And so like the flip side of that is you could just record like, all right, from today moving forward over the next month, like what are you spending your money on? You know, like writing down in a journal, like every single purchase you made. But yeah, that's exactly where I always tell people to start is like, you got to literally like print out your bank statements, take a highlighter to it and like color code everything. Like, all right, was this like a basic necessity? You know, like was this utilities or rent or any of these debt payments? Like where was all the miscellaneous or BS spending in there? And it should be like glaringly obvious after you do that. Like where are the holes in your budget? Like where do you have problem areas when it comes to your spending? Maybe the problem area is you're spending way too much money on like rent and utility, like your basic necessities just to survive are just way too high, you know? And so either you're living in an area that's too expensive or you're not making enough money. But I would say for most people, it's probably that like the BS spending, the unnecessary, like frivolous spending, like that's where most people are getting out of control with. And when you go through this process, like that's going to become so obvious. And like you said, it's going to be such a humbling process to go through.
Yeah, I think for myself, I quickly realized that like I was spending money that I shouldn't have been spending on stupid things, you know? Yeah. So then for me, like I just changed around what I wanted to be doing. Like my goal and we'll talk about goals and, you know, what you want to do with your money later. But for me, it was more of like the debt freedom part of it. So I really wanted to like prioritize my debt. Yeah. So for me, my money shifted around whenever I listed it all out. And then I was like, ooh, now my debt's going to be at the top there. So my other miscellaneous spending, it's going to go away now. So, you know, you really get to list all these things out and then make decisions, you know, going forward. But yeah, it's a little painful to, I think, get going, like you said. So you could just start from like, okay, I'm going to start in, you know, whatever month you're in, I'm going to start now and see where my money's actually going. Don't change anything. Just, you know, start from here and mark down every single time you're spending something and then, you know, track it that way if it's too scary to look backwards.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, I think, you know, to be clear, it sounds like you and I are both kind of saying like, you know, you don't necessarily have to go through this process and say, all right, these are all the things I have to cut. It's not that. Yeah. It's just like you should go through this process, get a full understanding, and then ask yourself, like, is this spending in line with where I want to be? Or like, does the spending actually make sense? Like, is it going to get me closer? Or is all of these things that I'm spending on, is it pushing me further away? You know, it's not, I don't think I certainly don't feel like it's my place to tell you like, hey, you shouldn't be spending your money on this thing. Right. Yeah. But I could tell you, hey, if you want to get there, spending your money over here isn't helping you get there, you know? And so like, that's what I mean. Like when you go through this, like the areas where like, all right, I'm probably overspending here, that's going to be obvious. And then you can see, all right, if I were to cut this down a little bit, how much can I actually free up? And then how could that actually translate into like real progress, you know? But yeah, like, I don't know. I feel like too many people don't realize that like that without tracking what you're spending, like there's just so many things that are going to fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of pushback on like this first step here is like time. And I think, you know, we hear it all the time. I don't have time to do that. I don't want to do that. Okay. I want to see your screen time on your phone. Like I want to see where your time is going because I know that we have at least, and Nick, once you get going on this, it only takes like maybe 10 minutes a week, you know, to like sit down and actually like, you know, check things off. Of course, this is going to take a little bit of time to set up at first, but yeah, I think a lot of things fall through the cracks when you're not paying attention to it. And like we're saying, this first step here is not to change anything. We just want to see where it's actually going. And so that you understand that and can make adjustments if you want moving forward. If you don't want to change anything, great. But I think there's going to be a lot of places in here where, especially for me, when I started my debt-free journey, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be spending there when I have this big goal of debt freedom. So I'm going to start shifting that money that I was, you know, spending on God knows what and putting it towards my debt. And I think this step is what will help you understand that. But just knowing the full picture first would be like the number one thing.
Yeah. And I genuinely, I don't think I've met a single person who genuinely doesn't have the time to do this, right? Like if you were to sit down and you go through a full month of spending, like it'll probably take you 30 minutes, maybe it'll take you an hour. But then like you said, moving forward, this is only going to take you a couple minutes a day at most, or maybe like 10 to 20 minutes a week to do. Like if you don't have that time, like you're probably lying, or you're probably like spending it doing things that aren't making an actual difference for you. But then the follow-up question I'd ask them is like, okay, well, how much longer can you go without finding the time to prioritize this? Like you're probably in a bad situation because you're saying, I don't have time to focus on my finances.
No, for sure. And I hate that too. I always compare this to like personal hygiene, like dental hygiene. Like we have to like brush our teeth and like shower so that we like don't stink and we don't get like cavities and stuff. And it's like, I don't know where money just became like this thing that we just don't take care of. Like it's something we work so hard for every single day, but we just absolutely neglect like the care of it. And like, I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, okay, I'm doing these things because I have to. Like I'm also managing my money because I have to. Like I literally work 40 hours plus a week for this. Like why are we just completely just like neglecting this side of our finances? I don't know. Doesn't make sense. But anyway, tip one is to understand your cash flow. And then, you know, we'll obviously make some adjustments from there.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to say it. Like taking the time to think about your money and to look at it should be just as important as like brushing your teeth every single morning. But yeah, let's jump into the second one. So tip number 2 is to create a money system. And look, I'm pretty sure that in almost every single episode of our podcast, we've talked about the importance of budgeting. And you know, to me, budgeting is always going to be something like that's going to be important for like your entire career, your entire financial journey, I should say. Like budgeting is always going to be at the core of like every solid financial plan in my eyes. And you know, how you budget, that's probably going to evolve as you start to get deeper and deeper into that journey. But I think when it comes to creating a money system, like it's like taking a budget and then going one step further. You know, it's not just the budget. Like a budget fits into your overall money system, but your money system is more than that. It's also about like how you manage your money in general. Like how do you organize your finances? How do you think about your finances? But Lauren, how do you think someone can take, you know, kind of to lay the groundwork here, like how can someone take what they learned in that first part where they understand their cash flow now, they know where like some of the holes were in their spending. How can they take that and put that into a really solid budget?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and like we've talked about many times, but you know, taking that information and that data that you have from your, you know, where your cash flow is, what's coming in, what's going out, and then making a plan that feels good for you. So if you don't like that you're spending $500 a month on eating out because it's providing honestly no return for you, then maybe you change that to do something different in your budget. So really the cash flow, like just understanding your cash flow is just like, you know, checking off like what you're spending each day. But now actually taking that information and morphing it into something that you're creating, which is your budget. So that's what I did in my debt-free journey. So whenever I, you know, took inventory of where everything was going, I was like, okay, that's not pretty. And I could be doing different things with my money. So for me, my biggest goal was debt, you know, paying off my debt. So in my budget, one of the first things in my line items was, you know, after my rent and my car payment and everything, was paying off those student loans and additional money towards, you know, paying off my car as well. So really prioritizing that money and putting it towards my debt payoff. So instead of it going towards miscellaneous things at Target, you know, I actually made a plan that was fit for my goals, you know? So I think that's really the first place to start is taking the data and see, you know, kind of, I don't necessarily say you have to journal about it, but look at that. What is painful for you to look at, like in your spending? Because there's going to be some place on your statements where you're like, that wasn't good, you know? So I think you can take that information and then now you're like, okay, how do I plan my next month moving forward with the money I know I have coming in and the information I have? So I'm going to change X, Y, and Z because these are my goals moving forward, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And you know, I think when it comes to all things like personal finance, like you can really make it as complicated as you want it. But I feel like so many people hear the word budget and they like freak out a little bit in their head. Like they build it up to be this thing that is so complicated in their mind when in reality, like it really just doesn't have to be. Like I feel like a good budget has to do 3 things. And for me, the first thing is like, does it cover all the things that need to be covered? So like your basic necessities, like, right, like your rent, utilities, groceries, gas. Does it cover all the other bills just to make sure you can get through the month? If you have debt, does it pay those minimum payments? The second thing for me, like, all right, are you making a plan for what to do with what's left over? And then the third thing to me is, are you actually using every single dollar of your income? Like if you're doing those 3 things, that to me is like, that's going to be a good budget. You know, like it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Now, depending on like your income or depending on when you get paid, like you might have to do a few things to kind of make the budget work with like how you're actually paid. And then when some certain bills come in at the end during the month, but like, you know, really like it doesn't need to be complicated. And then to your point, like if you're actually tracking everything, you're going to see like, all right, am I actually sticking to this budget? And if I'm not, like, where are the areas that I'm failing at?
Yeah, for sure. And I think also when you're talking about your money system, it can mean a few different things. Of course, like you mentioned, it's obviously the budget, but it can mean like, you know, what kind of accounts you have. So that was one thing for me that I cleaned up. And I think a lot of people get themselves into this mess where they have a checking account here and a credit card there, and multiple credit cards probably, and it's just a little confusing and feels overwhelming. So I think that's a good place to start too, when you're trying to get your money in order in these first 90 days, is to really take inventory of the accounts you have. So for me, Nick, I am super simple. I want to have one login for like every single thing I have. Yeah. So my debit, my high yield savings account, my debit card, and my credit card are all through the same company. So it's all on the same platform, and I can just, there it is. It's all there. I like to keep it super simple. So that's also a way that you're creating your money system, because you got to feel good about that as well. So I think that's a really good way to, kind of clean that up. And then of course, you're taking that information from, step one and really moving it into a budget. So now you know where your money is going because you're planning ahead for it. And then I also think you can start implementing some like automation in there. So if you know, a lot of people have this problem. A lot of people wait until the very end of the month and they're like, okay, I have $50 left to save, so I'll just go ahead and save that. Instead of saying up front, like, oh, I'm going to save this amount of money, you could go ahead and start transferring that in your account. If you know after your first paycheck of the month, you have a little bit of extra money you want to send into your savings, start putting that on an automated calendar, whatever. So it goes in there on the date that you want it to. Because I think that's a big part of people's finances that kind of slips away too. They don't plan these things. They don't automate anything. Mm-hmm. And then money just walks out of the account. So I think there's a lot of different things you could consider in your money system, but these are some like actionable things that you could take control of like right away.
All right, taking a quick break from today's episode, Lauren and I have some exciting news we'd like to share with you. If you're feeling stuck with your finances and don't know where to start, we have you covered with our one-on-one financial coaching.
These are no strings attached coaching sessions that you can sign up for today. No ongoing commitment. You simply book a session whenever you need one.
Each call is 90 minutes, and by the end of it, you'll have a clear budget to work with and a solid plan to start paying off your debt. Plus, we'll make sure you walk away with some awesome tools to keep you on track, including our budget dashboard and expense tracker, as well as our debt payoff optimizer.
And the best part, you'll get to work with both of us on the call. Together, we'll help you develop the best possible strategy forward, answer your questions, and make sure you feel confident about managing your money.
So if you're ready to get a handle on your budget and kickstart your financial journey forward, check out the link in the show notes to book your first session.
We can't wait to get started with you. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, I think moving the savings at the beginning is such a game changer. Like usually I'll tell people like, all right, this is your first time budgeting. Let's like go through a budget or two, make sure that the amount that you say you can save is realistic. And then once you get pretty accurate with the budgeting, put that at the very beginning of the month. Like right when you get paid on the first of the month, transfer that money right into savings and like force yourself to stick to the budget, because now that money just isn't there. But yeah, I think those other parts to it, like how many accounts do you have? How are you organizing your finances? Can you set up the automation? Like to me, that's really the money system. And then like you said, like keeping it simple more than anything. Like I think so many people have so many different accounts that in their minds, they kind of justify like, oh, well, I use this account for this thing and that account for this thing. And like, like I will say, like if you have like a spending problem and you need to like break up your money into different accounts to kind of hold yourself accountable, that's one thing. But if and I think that's actually a good idea. But if that's not you, right? If you can like reasonably control your spending, I would say like keep it as simple as you can. Like literally for me and my wife, it's like we have one checking account where we do all of our bill paying, and we have one credit card that we pay for all of our expenses. At the end of the month, I take what's left in that checking account and I pay off the credit card. Like that's it. We have a handful of savings accounts, then we have like our high yield savings accounts, our retirement accounts, all that kind of stuff. But there's one thing that I've been doing for a few years now that's like, to me, it's felt like the biggest game changer to managing my finances. I always call it getting 1 month ahead. I'm curious if there's like a real term for this out there. But basically like anytime my wife and I get paid, we put that money off to the side during the month. And then at the beginning of the next month, we take all that money and that's what we use for our monthly budget. And really this started because I self-employed my entire career. My income can vary. And so it was always really hard to figure out a budget based on an income that I didn't know yet. And so this was a way for me to do that. But also for a lot of people as well, like it makes paying bills so much easier because, you might get paid 2 or 3 times throughout the month, but then some of your bills are at the beginning, some are in the middle, some are at the end of the month. And so if you set all those paychecks aside so that at the beginning of the month, you have your entire budget's worth of income just there, you can pay all your bills on the first and second of the month. You can transfer all the money into your savings accounts that you need to. Then what's left is what's left to spend. It kind of keeps it really simple. And so to me, like that's been a huge game changer, especially as someone with a variable income. But, I found if you have the flexibility to like get to that point, like for anyone, it can be a huge way to to simplify like the budgeting process and the bill pay process. So you're not having to kind of juggle like when things are due versus when I'm getting paid, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Nick, I think I do something similar. I just don't, really have a system to it. I just sort of, my baseline for my checking account is like several $1,000s so that when things are coming out before I'm getting paid, like it's already there and it just sort of swaps out whenever I get paid. So kind of the same thing. I just never really had a name for it. But something you said made me think of this. So in the beginning of this tip, like, people don't like the word budgeting or whatever. And I don't think budgets have to look the same for every single person. I think you and I are just, interesting in the fact that we really like to every single expense, like check it off. And a lot of people are like that too. But I do know there's other people out there who that's very intimidating to and maybe a little too much for them. You could also create a system for yourself where you have like pots of money for different things, like maybe like 3 big buckets. You know what I mean? Like, okay, this is the money for my debts. This is the money for my savings. And this is the money for like the expenses or the bills that I have for this month, whatever you want to do. I had somebody that I worked with before who did that because it was too much for her to like actually be tracking everything. So she would give herself like a pot of money that was like, okay, this is what you can spend on whatever you want for this month. This is what you have for groceries. Like she would actually split it up that way. So it wasn't so intimidating to like track everything and just be like down to the penny. It was more of like, this is her freedom to spend. Okay, you have $150 this week to spend on, eating out, whatever you want to do. And that was just her freedom to do that. So I think there's different ways you could set it up, but you have to find what works best for you.
Yeah, it's almost like a virtual version of like the envelope method, which if everything wasn't so like, like there's places that don't even take cash anymore. So like if there was a more convenient way to do the envelope method, I would say that would probably be even easier than like what I consider budgeting, which is like you track every single dollar. You're recording every single expense. But like, if there was a virtual way to do that, that would be so much easier. But no, you're 100% right. And I think, I will say, like, in my mind, like, the worse your situation is, the more, like, meticulous you need to be, the more, like, in the weeds you need to be about tracking everything. But, like, if your situation isn't like, quote unquote, bad, but you just don't feel like you have full control over it, like, you can be a little bit more forgiving with yourself on how you approach budgeting. And I think, like, as you start to get to a really, really deep into your financial journey, like, you can really kind of step away from budgeting and kind of just do it loosely. And my favorite way of doing that is like, all right, roughly, like you said, how much is it going to cost? Like how much do I need to get through the month to cover all my bills, to pay for like groceries and gas, to make sure I have money for spending? And then can I just like front load my checking account with that amount of money? And, I'm pretty comfortable spending that I can stay within that amount. And then can I just actually make a plan for what's left over of my income? That way, I would rather see someone be a little bit more meticulous with how they're saving, how they're investing, versus like just focusing on tracking every single expense if they're at kind of like that higher level with their finances to where, they're not going to get as much return with spending that time there. If that, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'm kind of there. I still like to track things, but it hasn't been as frequently. I've noticed like I'll like sit down and I went to Pennsylvania last month to spend some time at home, and I came back and I was like, oh, I haven't looked at my money in a few weeks. I'm not worried about money anymore. I'm not in a place where I'm, when I was during my debt-free journey, I was constantly like, had to know exactly where everything was going because, I was trying to pay off my debts. But now I'm at a spot where I'm like, money's fine. I have a job. Like I'm not a wild spender or anything. I have those couple $1,000s in my checking just to like buffer everything as it's coming in and coming out. So, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm just kind of backing off a little bit, but still, as I'm doing it, as I'm sitting down every 2-3 weeks, I am, tracking things, but I'm trying to step back from a little bit because like you said, it can, take some time to do that. But should we jump into, kind of wrapping this whole thing up with a bow?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. You said like, I think the word you used was like, we're interesting in that way. I'll be honest. It's just weird. I'm weird. Yeah. I know that.
I know. Me too.
It's like therapeutic for me to be very meticulous, and like I feel messier when I don't have like, when I'm not like tracking everything, and like when I have like full clarity over everything, I'm like, oh, I can take a deep breath now. Like everything like makes sense in my head. I know where every single thing's at. But yeah, I know that's super weird. Most people aren't like that. So you got to find the system that works for you. But yes, let's move into the last tip for today, which is to make a plan with your money. And so, kind of taking these two parts that we've already talked about. One, understanding your cash flow, and then two, creating a solid system for your money, which should include budgeting, but should also be like the budgeting and then the other parts, which is like could be automating or organizing or even just how you think about your money, taking all of that and actually making a plan. And, you know, kind of like what we talked about in the beginning about you need to have a clear vision. Like, what is the actual goal that you want to do? What are the tangible parts of that goal? Like the money side, the money aspects of that goal. And then what are some of the more like, intangible things, like do you want to feel differently with your money, and then, like how can you actually start to make a plan with your money to actually achieve those goals. And you know, I would say for most people, like what they want to make a plan for is going to fall into one of these three categories of wanting to get out of debt, wanting to build up their savings for, you know, some goal into the future, or wanting to invest more, whether that's for retirement or something else down the road. So why don't we kind of jump into that first one of like, if someone's goal is to get out of debt, like how could they start to make a plan with their money to do that?
Great question, Nick. Because that was one of my major goals. Of course, I've mentioned that many times. So, and it's nice how these steps go because it's exactly what I did for my process. I sat down, looked at my numbers, and two, I created a system of how I was going to budget out my money moving forward. And then my last step was really to make a plan for my money. So for myself, it really wasn't, I wasn't in a big savings mode or investing. I really wanted to pay off my debt, and I knew I wanted to do it quickly. So for me, it was, how can I change around, this plan that I have set up for money, the system, the budget I built for myself. How can I move some things around on here to help me pay off my debt quicker? Because that was my ultimate goal. That might not be everyone's goal. Like you said, there's probably a few places they're going to fall in here. But for me, it was really like, what can I change from my current sort of money system here to make me get out of debt quicker? Because that's really the goal I want. Yeah. I want to do this as fast as possible. So for me, it was, I told you, I've mentioned this before, like I literally cut everything out of my life that I could. I don't think I bought clothes for like 3 years during that time, just because I didn't want to spend money on that. So for me, it was like my priority was the debt at the top of my, of course my money came in, and then it was like, okay, what can I put towards my debt? Of course you had to pay your bills and stuff first. Everything that's necessity is going there. And then after that, it was like, how much can I chuck at this debt? So that's really how I sort of created my plan. Was when, go through like what's most important to you, and then how can you sort of adjust your budget to accomplish what your goal is, I guess.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said it, if the primary goal is I want to get out of debt, like then the plan, the budget, everything is going to reflect that. But if there are other things in your life that you want to be doing while you're getting out of debt, like then the plan should reflect that as well. Like, again, like I mean, look, I'm a big believer, like if you want to get out of debt, you should focus on getting out of debt. But like I said, I know I'm a little bit weird about when it comes to money. And so like, if you have, if you're someone who can have multiple goals, which is totally fine, then, the plan has got to reflect that. But, at the end of the day, like your spending is going to reflect what you really want to happen in your life, And so if you're looking at your spending and it's not reflecting that, there's some course correction that needs to happen. But in terms of like getting really tangible with getting out of debt, like it's, again, just like with budgeting, it doesn't have to be complicated. Like you got to list out your debts, right? And so the first part of that is knowing all the information with your debts, which you should have done in that first part, right? Like understanding like, all right, how much do I owe? What are the interest rates? What are the monthly minimum payments? And then listing those out. Typically people will either list it out from smallest balance to largest balance, or from highest interest rate down to lowest interest rate. There's pros and cons for either of them. List out your debts though in whichever way you think makes most sense for you, and then use that budget to figure out, all right, here's how much I can afford to pay towards these debts. And if you want to set some aside for other goals, that's great. I would just say, as long as you're putting enough towards those debts to where it's going to be meaningful. If you're like, hey, like I'm just throwing an extra $100 towards these debts, like that's probably not going to do a whole lot to actually shave off like potentially years off your credit card debt, for example. Like I would say, figure out an amount that's going to make a meaningful impact on paying down that debt. And then if you have other goals, cool, now we can allocate the rest of your money towards that. And then it's just like kind of working that plan. If, for some people that's going to be months, for some other people, it's going to be years to get out of debt. But I think having that plan of like, all right, once I pay off this debt, this will be the next one and the next one, and then reflecting that inside of the budget.
Yeah, for sure. So this is a good example. So at the time, my budgets were, I told you, it was very slim. I was taking everything that I made for the month. So I would say average, like let's just round up, but I'd say average, I was making like 3,000 a month at the time. And I was putting about, I think 1,500 towards my bills. So, and that means like my rent, our groceries and things like that, whatever I needed, and utilities, whatever we need to survive. And then I was literally like taking the 1,500 extra that I had, and that was going towards my debt every single month. Now there's times where something would pop up and I'd have to shift that a little bit, but that was how I got super specific with it. I just, put everything at the top that I needed to, and then whatever I had left over, that's how I sort of created my debt free, like payoff plan, because I was like, you have to put more towards it if you want to see the, how fast it's going to move. I mean, I could not believe that I paid off. I was making at the time, like between 48 and 50,000 a year. And my debts were like at 52,000 by the end of it. That's what I paid off. And it was crazy that I was able to do that in like 3 years, but just having that intentionality behind it and actually throwing that money towards it and planning was exactly what got me there. And, you say we talked about that we're weird because we like to track everything, but it got me to this crazy goal that I had. So it worked for me. So that's why I've always just kind of stuck with it, because it got me to a place that I never thought possible. So that's like my own personal story from it, but just wanted to share like how I sort of like mapped it out. Like, okay, here's what I have to spend here on bills and whatever. And then here's what I get to spend on like my debt, my goal of being debt free,
Yeah, 100%. Now, okay, why don't we move into the next one then? So if someone's goal is, they want to make a plan to build out their savings, what do you think is the way that they can approach it? And like, it sounds like you kind of outlined it already a little bit, but like how do they change that plan a little bit to start building up their savings if, for example, there's a few goals that they have in front of them?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Not everybody's goal, again, we are weird. So like not everybody's goal is going to be to like, I wouldn't want to say suffer, but like suffer for 2.5, 3 years to get out of debt. Right. So I understand that there's going to be people that maybe want to, pay off their debt a little bit, but also want to potentially boost their savings, have that emergency fund set aside. I think there's some ways to do it. I think, you're going to have to get clear with that. I think that's what the planning part 2 is about, really getting your system set in place. And now you get to determine where you want to send your money, whether that's, getting specific with savings goals. I think having not just like a broad savings, like overall goal, but like actually breaking down what that looks like. Okay, every month I want to send $100 into my high yield savings account, and the rest of my money is going to pay off this debt. Or if you don't care about your debt, whatever. But I would have some goals there for like savings. Like, okay, I'm going to save for a car. I'm going to save for my high yield savings or for my emergency fund, like whatever that looks like for you. But I think there needs to be some like actual like reasons for savings. I don't love just like broad savings goals because I think it goes into a little pot and then you pull it out for random stuff. If it has a name and you have a dollar amount going to it every month, then I think you're going to be a little bit better about like actually letting it grow and having, the willpower to actually put your money in those different savings goals.
Yeah, I love that you said that last part, because I feel like people can kind of like not realize that they're not necessarily good with their money just because they're good at saving. Being a good saver doesn't necessarily mean that you're good with managing your money. It just means that you're, in one sense, it might just mean that you're afraid to spend money, Yeah. But yeah, what you said about getting very specific about the goals, like to me, it's like, all right, can we identify like the top 2 or 3 things that are really important to you? Take that budget that we talked about, figure out how much can you actually put towards all of these goals, and then break it down from there. Like, all right, this goal is the most important, so I'm going to put the most of my savings towards that. And then maybe the rest I'm going to break up across these other 2 or 3 other important goals. But yeah, like with budgeting, like it doesn't have to be complicated. I do just think like, as you get to those higher levels, like you want to be very meticulous with your savings, and I think attaching that to like a timeline too. So like, for example, if all right, I'm saving X a number of dollars per month, like, all right, I'm going to get to this goal in this number of months. Like if I want to save $1,000 or $1,200, just to do the math easy, if I want to save $1,200 and I'm saving $100 a month, it's going to take me a full year to get there. It's like, does that match up? Does my savings rate towards that goal match up with the timeline of when I want to hit that goal? I think that's a huge part of it. But okay, moving into the last one then, making a plan for investing. Now, I think people will see like there's a trend here. You know, it's like figure out how much you can afford to do and then figure out what's the right amount to put towards that. And so I think when it comes to investing in particular, like I think you can get a little bit more specific and say like, one, like what are you investing for? Like when do I want access to this money rather? That's going to help you figure out kind of what accounts you should be using with investing in particular. You know, it's like the type of account you want it to match up with what the goal is. For example, if the goal is for retirement, it needs to be inside of a retirement account. If it's saving for my child's education, it should be in like a 529. If it's saving for like a car that I might not need for another 8 to 10 years, cool. Like maybe I'll throw that into a brokerage account or something, you know? And then from there, kind of figuring out again, like similar with the savings goal. All right, how much do I want to save? And then will my savings rate actually get me there? You know, and we can kind of use things like a compound interest calculator, for example, to kind of figure out some of that math.
Yeah, and I think the investing one is not as fun because it's going to be the long-term game. It's not going to be something you're going to be able to do really quickly. For me, that's more of like just like set it and forget it. Like every single month, you know, I'm maxing out my Roth IRA. So every month I'm, what is it, $583 a month if you want to do the full 7,000. So that's just automatic for me. So it's not even like, it's not, I mean, it's a goal, but like at this point, it's just like, I'm not even thinking about it, you know, anymore. So, but yeah, I think those, you know, you can definitely incorporate that into the plan for your money. But I think another thing we should mention is we haven't talked about, we can still have fun with our money while paying off our debts, while, you know, savings and also investing. Investing's for the long term. It doesn't mean you have to just put all of your money towards that. But I think the biggest thing is planning for it, right? Plan out the fun things you want to do. If you want to save for a vacation, or if you want to just be able to go to dinner a few times a month, just make sure you're putting that into your plan while also meeting the bigger goals that you have, whether it's debt, savings, or investing for the future.
Yeah, I think all of it's balance, you know, and like everything being proportionate to how important those goals are for you. Like I said, like, you know, we've read through situations in the past where people are like, this debt is like literally killing me. Like it's the last thing I think about at the end of the day and the first thing I would think about when I wake up. If that's your situation, you should be putting every single dollar towards debt. Yeah. But if your debt is manageable and you know, all right, if I reasonably pay this off, I can get it done in, you know, 3 years and I'm comfortable with that. Cool. Let's make sure that that's still the priority, but then you make a plan for the rest of your money. You know, like that's the whole point of the budget. That's the whole point of making a plan, is so that you know that I'm going to reach these goals if I just stick to this, and then I can still enjoy life with the rest of it. And you know, like I'm a big believer, like if you want to get out of debt, you got to focus on getting out of debt. With that said though, like I'd always rather see someone take a little bit longer if they're going to follow a plan that they're actually going to stick to. You know, like I would hate to see someone try to go like cold turkey with all the spending and then they keep like hitting that wall where they revert back to those old habits. You know, that's going to take them so much longer than if they just allowed themselves to say, you know what, I'm going to spend $100 or $200 a month on like the frivolous spending, and then the rest of the money will go towards debt. And this will make sure that it's sustainable for the next, you know, 1, 2, or 3 years, however long it's going to take you to hit that goal of getting out of debt.
Yeah, Nick, that's a great point because I've mentioned this so many times. I was so strict on my debt payoff journey, but I know that couldn't be for everybody, you know? So I would rather see you like adjust your plan a little bit and actually stick with the goal long term rather than being so strict on it and then just like completely falling off, which I think happens to a lot of people. They try to get really strict with their plan and then they end up just falling off and never accomplishing that goal. So yeah, totally understand what you're saying there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, I think this part, you know, like when we're talking these 3 different tips, like this one is not going to take you 90 days, right? Like, but I think if you can get really clear on what do all the numbers look like everything coming in, everything going out, what does that look like? Can I put that into a really solid budget? Can I create like a real system for my money? And then can I put together a plan? I think if you can do those 3 things, like if you were to have none of them and then all of a sudden you were to go through this process and get all of these 3 things, like you're going to feel like a brand new person when it comes to how you're even just thinking about your finances. And like what I found for most people is like having the clarity, that's what then leads to having the confidence. Like having the clarity, having a plan, saying like, all right, if I just stick to this plan, I'll be good. Like that's what starts to build up the confidence. And you know, things like this, like getting that clarity, putting those numbers together, that kind of stuff is so achievable in 90 days or even less. You know, you could do this if you really sat down, over a weekend, you can put together all of this information, and then it's just spending the next few months like really dialing it in, I guess, so to speak. But yeah, that wraps up today's episode. And we wanted to keep this one short just so it was really like packed a punch of everything we think you could start doing today that's really going to transform your finances over the next 90 days. But as always, if you enjoyed this episode, the best way you can help us grow is by considering to subscribe and then sharing this with a friend.
Yeah, and if you want to have your money questions answered on the show, you can visit our website, justanothermoneypodcast.com, and click the submit a question button. And don't forget to join us for another episode of Just Another Money Podcast.
The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.